The Earley Show will begin after a brief word from today's sponsor, Answering Legal. Visit answeringlegal.com to learn more about our 24/7 virtual receptionist team.
One of the things that Answering Legal allows me to do is quickly get back to new clients that are calling, and that's absolutely critical because when you're dealing with a criminal case, time is of the essence. I've been hired because I was the only lawyer who called the person back. Calling means you care. When you call a client back quickly, it means you care. Answering Legal has really allowed me to excel and have personal time with my family and a great quality of life.
Chris, welcome to another episode of the Earley Show, sponsored by our friends over at Answering Legal. As always, we have a real treat for you. And today we have a very, very special guest for you. We have Harlan Schillinger, who is the true OG of attorney advertising. He's seen a thing or two in decades of attorney advertising. So we're going to learn a lot from him today. For nearly 50 years, he's been in this space of marketing, advertising. So he knows it. And a lot of things he is responsible for creating that we see and hear today in the marketplace. So as always, on each episode, make sure you sharpen your pencils because we're going to have a lot of writer-downers, I'm sure. So Harlan, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Chris. I'm going to warn the audience that it's very early where I am. So my voice is a little raspy. I'm still a little sleepy. So I'm just hoping that you don't take advantage of this old guy.
No, I promise I won't. I promise I won't. But I was just thinking a minute ago about how we met. We met we'll get into NTL, how you started, National Trial Lawyers, but you and I met in Miami and we had never talked before. And I went up to you and said, Harlan, you got to come on my podcast. I want to talk to you. And you said, hold on a minute. Let's get to know each other. And that was funny because I'd seen you at conferences and you're like me. You're into this. You're in it to win it, and you geek out on it. You get into the minutia. You do it. You do it right. I respect that. So I wanted to get you on because as I said, you've seen a thing or two, and I'm excited to talk with you. But I just makes me chuckle how we met at Miami NTL, and you're like, hey, you were like, pump the brakes.
I remember that day. I remember it so very specifically. I specifically remember where it was too. Hey, so listen, I just want to make something clear. I'm only one of the founders of National Trial Lawyers. We were sitting on my dear friend Keith Gibbons' deck in Dothan, Alabama with Howard Nations, John Romano, myself, and Keith, and we really came up with the idea and understanding that we need something that addressing the business of law. And this was, I guess, about 15 years ago. And, we're very, very big supporters of AHA. They were not providing a business outlet. And the business was really changing. I mean, you really got to have a business acumen, to survive. Even the greatest lawyers. I remember Howard, who was one of the finest lawyers and human beings I know, said, I could be the greatest trial lawyer on the planet. And of course, I think he even said he might be, kiddingly. But if he didn't have a business acumen, he wouldn't be in business today. And we've lost friends along the way that were tremendous trial lawyers, but terrible businessmen. Our past dear friend Melvin Belli, was a great example. Brilliant operator. But when it came to managing, business, he struggled, truthfully. And that's how National Trial Lawyers came about. But you asked me, how we started this whole thing, which is kind of a fluke, truthfully. I was a partner in a company called Madison, Weiskins and Jones, and basically we created syndicated advertising for high-end retail. At the time we were doing the De Beers commercials, Noxema, take it off, take it all off, and Bill Weiskins was my mentor, and he was the executive creative director, J. Walter Thompson, at the time, and he wanted to get out from Madison Avenue. He was, at a young age, he was already burnt out. Came up with the idea of, producing high-end commercials, syndicating them around the country, sharing the cost, All of television is syndicated, Chris. They build a mini series and they sell it to different, or Oprah. That's why you see her on, well, you saw her on ABC in one market and CBS on another because they purchased it. Anyway, we took a flyer on lawyers and we produced this group of commercials. And today I'd still run them with the exception of the wardrobes. They're all in the mid 70s look. But the message is true. And we fanned out, we sold a whole lot of lawyers, and that's how it really began. That's how the advertising end of it began.
So let me ask you this. So if I'm not mistaken, did you grow up in New York City?
I did. I spent the first 14 years of my life in Manhattan, and we summered, and we were in Long Beach, Long Island, every weekend, and that's how I became one of the original surfers in the New York area, and went to school in the city, and then I immediately wanted to get out, like most New Yorkers. They want to get out. Non-New Yorkers want to get in, and stumbled into this opportunity.
So at what point? Is this the mid 70s?
I think it was in 74, the end of 74.
If I'm not mistaken, was Lynn Jacoby your first attorney client?
No, actually, he was not. But what I will give Len credit for is he was the very, very first person to advertise. And he and Steve Myers and Gail Koff started advertising prior to the Bates decision, prior to the Supreme Court decision. He took a flyer. Actually, if you go to the National Trial Lawyers Advertising Hall of Fame site, you'll see a great video that gives the actual history of how this whole thing really started. He was the original person on television, no question about it. He became a client for 35 years, for many, many years. Once we developed that relationship, and was a longstanding client of my old agencies.
So I've heard you talk about being an early adopter, right? So you're getting into the space, and then you're getting into the legal space. So I've heard you remark, you're an early adopter. It sounds like you're an early adopter as it relates to attorneys getting on TV, because at the time that was unheard of, right? I mean, that was completely foreign territory. No one did it. They couldn't do it. So take us back. What did that look like? Was people tell you you're crazy, it's not going to work, or how dare you? This is unprofessional. Like, what was the culture like back then?
Well, it was divided. You had a group of young lawyers that were coming up that understood the business aspect of it, and they were the rebels. And then you had the establishment that was in shock because they were denigrating the industry, the message. It's professional, we don't do that. But truthfully, I think they were trying to protect their good old boy network. Why would I have somebody competing against me when I'm the big fish? And really it was I believe it was a political situation between the old line and the new line. But we discovered there was some energetic lawyers around the country that were recognizing and looking at this. And quite frankly, I remember vividly, those days and the expression on and the attitude towards some of the people we put on television. And they were as scared as we were, but they were taking a chance. I mean, they really took a chance. So I don't want to use the word early adapter. I'd rather put that towards how you embrace things coming down the road now. But there's some of that, an early adopter. I mean, there were, I think we had a list of about 58 lawyers, which was enormous, that said, I'm going on television and that's what I'm going to do.
So your client at the time, did the phone, from what you're, going back in time, did the phone just start ringing, or was this a slow burn? What did your clients experience?
No, this is exactly what happened. A client would go on television, or the client would go on television, and their phone would not stop ringing. It was ringing off the hook. The advertising, because there was nothing like it. The advertising was amazing, and of course, that brought on the biggest challenge of all. What do you do with all this, and how do you service everybody, and how you grow? Because we didn't even know what we were doing. We didn't know we were creating this whole new industry. We didn't have, we had a switchboard. That was it. And we'd stand around and we'd take a look at what was going on. It was almost going to blow up. For the first 15 years of advertising, you couldn't get out of the way of things. So you can't imagine how much fell off the plate. Another early adopter, you're up in Boston, aren't you, Chris? One of the very early adapters was Jim Sokoloff. He was one of the very first advertisers. He might have been the third, fifth, I don't know. But he went on television in 81. And that was a very early time for him to adapt. So you saw that growing up.
100%. Yeah. Yeah, he got in early.
Between cartoons, when you were a kid on Saturday morning, you'd see, Sokoloff's commercials.
Yeah. And then, John Morgan got in, right? I think, mid 80s. So let me ask you this. So, I've heard you talk about, as it relates to, the business of law, right? Because I feel like this is the new in vogue business of law, but this is like, you go back to the late 70s, business of law was like, what are you talking about, man? Like this is a practice, this is a profession, and it's still a profession, right? But I feel like the business of law, the, National Trial Lawyers, that organization, people are becoming a lot more sensitive. So I feel like the new jacks coming out of law school are getting a lot of exposure that, hey, this is a profession, yeah, but it's a business. As it relates to that, let me ask you this. I've heard you talk as well about there's sort of like, and this really resonates with me. So I just want to hear you, talk about it if you could. You talk about there's players and there's spectators in this industry. Could you tell us, what that looks like to you? What's a player and what's a spectator, and why is that important distinction?
Well, I don't know if I've used those specific terms, but I'm going to run with what you just said because that's a good description. A player is somebody that's involved, and a spectator is somebody that watches from the sidelines. And it falls into being an early adapter, being involved, being revolutionary. And so what happened early on, and I'll use the analogy of, or the comparison or what description of what happened was you had a bunch of lawyers that jumped into this thing. Richard Mulholland in Tampa, Bruce Shiner, the Trantolos. I mean, I can visualize the, in each of these markets. And this is going around in 81, 82, 83. So that's when it really started to make ground. Although we produced our first commercials in 79, 78. By the time it got going, getting schedules and production, and the spectators that stood on the side, were very critical. They were very, very critical. You can't do that. Why are you doing that? And then there were spectators that viewed what was going on and saying, how am I going to make this work for me? So that's the view of the spectator. The participants were the guys that the people that jumped in. They jumped in and they didn't know where they were jumping. They saw a tremendous opportunity, and they took that on. I don't think that they teach more business in law school today than they did back in the 70s. If you think about the lawyers that are coming out of school today, there is no business acumen being taught in law school. You're not going there for business. I believe they really should, because it is a business and it has to be handled like a business. And if it isn't handled like a business, not everyone wins, especially the client. I mean, let's not forget, Chris, this is all about the client.
I learned that from our mutual friend, Ken Hardison. It's about the betterment of the client. And that hit me with a ton of bricks. And I preach that to younger lawyers. It's all about the client. I teach my lawyers in my firm. It's about the clients. That's all you got to worry about. Everything's going to work out.
Not all lawyers don't teach that. Not all lawyers, they say it, but they don't live it.
Yeah, right. And it's pretty easy to live. It's just authentic. But the thing about the people coming out of law school now, Harlan, they can go to the NTL conference and geek out. They can listen to the podcast. But I feel like back in the 70s, 80s, business. Nothing. So how could you avail yourself? How could you educate yourself? Now I'm always, flying to hear people like you speak about this is like a science. This is like this is data, right? This is important stuff to get into.
Well, to capsulate, to use the right word, it's a business. It is a business. And, if you don't understand the business aspect of anything and you're in business, then I think you're screwed.
Agreed. But it's hard, Harlan, because there's a lot of I see it all the time in the industry. There's lawyers that are just sort of they're running a business, and then there's trial lawyers who are running the business. So I think it's hard to serve two masters. I think it's hard to do two things well at the same time. So I try to lean into what I'm passionate about is running the business, and then the trials. I'd rather delegate that, right? I'd rather give that to someone else because I think you can't be everything to everyone. You got to be a little focused.
But I would challenge that. I would challenge that. I believe that you can be a good lawyer and represent your clients, because that is your obligation. In fact, Chris, the very first contract that you ever signed, or any lawyer ever signs, is with the state bar. And you take an oath. You sign a contract to do just that. I'm going to do this. I'm going to treat. It's all about your client and how you're going to conduct yourself with that client. I have never met a lawyer, in the thousands of lawyers that I've ever met in my life, I've never met a lawyer that read that after they signed it, which is kind of interesting. That's the one commercial that I really want to do. I want somebody to read that paragraph and say, that's what I signed then, and this is what I'm re-signing now, because this is about you, not about me. The business end of it, I mean, you've got to have a business acumen to manage the business, the money, it's the experts, the case. If you don't have a business in place to manage, what the client needs, then you're not really providing them with opinions. You got to execute, and you have to have a business acumen to execute.
Well, especially now, Harlan, with non-lawyer ownership sweeping the nation, right? In your state, right, in Arizona, the wave is coming. I don't see how someone's not sensitive to the fact that this is a business, how they're going to survive in this new economy that we're getting into here. So even if you're running like a business, there are people that want to take your business from you. They want to eat you up, right? Private money is coming in. I'd love to hear what's your take on that. Like, I feel like you're good at looking into the future and prognosticating. Like, what do you see?
Well, we've kept an eye on this for a very, very long time, and it really started with the UK model. The UK model went public, a number of years ago. I'm guessing it maybe 10 years ago, and we watched that very thoroughly. We watched friends come from Australia, who was part of the UK model, and how they recreated their business, how they went public, how they set it up, how they serviced, and also we had an opportunity to see what the effect of all that was on the public, and then the public input. But to be very distinct, this is not. I don't believe it's sweeping the country, because there's less than 40 ABSs in Arizona, which is not a lot, but it is a lot. But it is definitely coming, and it's just like the medical profession. You couldn't fee split, and you couldn't share fees, and you couldn't be a non-doctor, running a practice, and now it's all run by non-doctors, and they employ the doctor. But that is on the way. I think it's going to have to go through the Supreme Court, though, for it to be across the board. Now, let me tell you why I think that, and I think smart money is looking at that also, is because a hedge fund right now is not contributing and handing over money and saying, I want to grow your business. They're lending money. All of these initiatives are based on collateral. In order to collect money, you have to be able to collect it in every state. And hedge funds are not going to and are not participating until they know they can collect their money. And right now they can't. And I know there's all kinds of gimmicks, and maybe you can, funnel it through a Washington, D.C. firm or an Arizona firm. But the truth of the matter is smart money which is hedge fund money, is has not yet thrown in the pile. And I wouldn't be surprised, in the very, very near future that it does go to the Supreme Court. But we've got to have a ruling that says it's an even playing field, so I can collect my money in every state. And that's a simple assessment of where I think it's at. That doesn't mean you don't prepare for it. And if you're in denial that it isn't coming, then that's just what you are, is in denial, and that'll pass by you.
So, and you mentioned ABS, that's alternative business structure, is that right?
Correct. That's the nomenclature. That's what they describe it as. That's what the reference is.
Well, yeah, it's coming. Just a matter of when that's going to be. I just think someone coming out of law school. I'm basically mid-career, right? I don't know how much it's going to impact me in my career. Time will tell. But for someone, we keep talking about that new Jack with the newly minted lawyer. The ink is drying in the bar card. I think they're going to be pretty impacted at some point, right? To what degree, I don't know. But this world is changing in this industry, especially. It's mind-boggling to think that we're here and it's just gaining momentum. And that's why the business of law has never been more crucial to embrace, right? I just feel like the practitioner, and I'm always preaching this. Every guest, Harlan, we always get into this, right? I just think it's really important.
I'll make the comparison to the business of law to where we are in advertising on television. People say that television is dying. It's not the same. There's truth to that. However, there's 900 opportunities on the tube. And the reason I'm going to make this comparison is that there's never been more people watching the tube in the history of the tube. You've never seen more content. You've never seen more opportunity. You've never seen more variety. You've never seen more production. If you can't find a movie on streaming or cable or network, then they're not looking at all. And the business of law is somewhat similar. There's never been more opportunity in the business of law. I mean, look, there's never been more software to help you run your business, choices. There's never been more opportunity on how to, create accounting. I mean, so if you look at all of the facets of where the business of law is and what is provided, I mean, all you have to do is walk into the National Trial Lawyers, the exhibit area, and you have so many businesses that are catering, and so you've never had more choices and it is confusing. That's another conversation. But take a look at what's happening. You can't run your business. I don't care if you're a single practitioner with one person. The phone's got to ring, and you got to answer that phone, and you can't be in court at the same time when you're answering your phone. So it becomes a business solution on how I'm going to challenge myself to simply answer that telephone. I mean, that's a very simplistic version, but I think you can understand it very easily. I'm more into storytelling.
Let me ask you this on that point. TV has become has mushroomed into so many. It's still you're captive. You're sitting in front of something, right? Has your philosophy? Because I've heard you talk about the lawyer advertising should be talking as if they're talking to a jury, right? Has that wavered since the 70s, or is that just a principle that is timeless?
I think it's developed since the 70s. Like anything else, you evolve in a message. Early on, we had an opportunity to do this advertising thing, and so then you advertise. So what do you say? What do you say? Should we say? I think we said, I'm giving the keys to the. I'm gonna give access to the little guy to the courtroom. I think that was the overall message. If you've been injured, that was I think the overall thinking. But my philosophy has not changed. In fact, I'm doubling down on it. The reason I like that analogy, and the analogy, to put it in perspective, is I talk to the public the way I would a jury. When you present your case to a jury, you have to be affable. You have to be likable. You have to have credibility. And you get what you ask for. And you tell a story. If you sit in some of the greatest jury trials, or some of the worst. You'll see how you have to relate and have to convince, 12 people in the jury that your client deserves this reward. Now that's a lot of responsibility. And so how do you break through and how do you ask for that? And you get what you ask for in life. In advertising, that's a key component to advertising. You get what you ask for. I always remember that. And that's what was taught to me when I got into this business. You get what you ask for. So how do you want to go about asking for it?
I think you need to be not about you, about them, right? Because it's not about Harlan or Chris. It's about how can we help the other guy. We just talked about this before we started recording. I think you and I we're givers. That's why you've been so successful. You're not a taker, you're a giver. John Morgan talks about giving. All the successful people talk about giving. So that's what's so curious, Harlan. On TV, everyone's saying the same stuff.
You know what they're saying? They're saying, me, I can get you this, I can do this, I can pound my chest bigger than somebody else.
People don't care. They don't care. You're intimidating them. You're intimidating them. We know you're a lawyer. You're in a suit. I'm kind of intimidated by you. Like that's not good sales. Like that's not good positioning. And all lawyers do it.
Well, I think the single most important reason that people do that is that they're unoriginal and they copy the other person. They're sheep. Lawyers are sheep. Most people are sheep. And I'm trying not to say that in a condescending way, Chris. I think one of the most fun presentations I ever made in my life is, and it was when I was involved with my agency, is I put together, I think, I don't know, it was 1,000 commercials. And for only 3 seconds, first 3 seconds of the commercial. And I played it, in a 4-minute time. It took 4 minutes to do that, and everything said, I'm going to get you I'm going to, and I'm the money. And it was like so entertaining, but it was so sad. It was so ridiculous. It was sad. Listen, I'm known when everybody goes to the left, I go to the right. I have been that way all of my life. I'm contrary to everybody else, not everybody, but people's thinking. I do have a following. Because the truth of it is, and my philosophy is, you do get what you ask for. And I've learned, how to message. I mean, I've read everything that Jerry Spence could ever possibly write, or any of the great storytellers. Mr. Cochran would tell a story, and he would relate to the jury in such simple terms, because you have to be simple when you talk to people, but you get what you ask for. I'm going to go back to that. The other thing about storytelling is you want somebody to say, well, tell me more. In your advertising, tell me more. But we're overrun right now by greed and by arrogance and by I'm going to do the same as the other guy because I'm smarter than the other guy, but I can do it better. And that's what 90% I think of the advertising out there looks like.
Well, I hope people are listening because that's a writer downer, right? When people are zigging, you want to zag. Someone who comes to mind is Mike Morse. He was on the show a couple months ago, right? Cherry Vanilla. He's not pumping out vanilla content. It's Cherry Garcia. Cherry Garcia. The guy's crushing it because he's different. He has a different mess. His mom's in the commercials. He's mixing it up. But most guys and gals, Harlan, I know you know and you see it, they won't zag. They'll just zig like everyone else or whatever. And that's low hanging fruit. My practice started to take off when I started to go the other way.
Well, I think that, we can segment into where the business is these days. And the volume law firms are not thriving. They're contracting. They're not growing. If you're taking 200, 300 cases in a month, you're not taking 201 cases in a month. You're spending much more to keep what you have. The pie is being absolutely divided. So what's your business? What's your business plan? I mean, how are you going to continue to throw money? I have a friend that's spending $3 million a year in a market in Vegas, and he's taking in 25, 30 cases a month. He used to take in 250 cases a month, but so, I mean, what's the business plan here? I mean, how do you survive? I think the most sensible thing is to get good cases. get better cases. And then the question is, how do you do that? Every single lawyer wants, hypothetically, a trucking case or a wrongful death case, or, they advertise, well, we take serious cases. Well, everybody takes serious cases. Come on. I think the smartest answer to how to get good cases, and I learned this, I actually, my former associate, Tammy Kay, said this to me. She says, I asked one of my clients, who's a really great lawyer, be a good lawyer. Be a great lawyer and you get great cases. That's who gets the great cases. I'm not talking about the ones that fall into your advertising bucket, because something, fell off a ladder. I'm talking about consistently getting good cases. And in today's age, you've got to settle those cases or try those cases for maximum dollars. And keep in mind, 90%, in my opinion, this is only my opinion, 90% of the lawyers out there, Chris, sell their clients short.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question, and this kind of relates to something else I've heard you talk about, and you've said that lawyers have a license to print money, right? And could you speak to that? Because I think a lot of lawyers, I think that's true. Like, we have such privilege to impact society and be remunerated very fairly. What's your take on that?
Well, the reality of it, and the reason I say it that way, and I say it with a little bit of arrogance, and I'm somewhat condescending about it, is because there is no other profession that I'm aware of. There certainly is, but this profession, that there's no ceiling on how much money you can make. You're in a contingency business. You can be in a bar drinking, and the guy next door gets into an accident, and he calls you, and you can settle the case for whatever it is. Not if he's drunk, but the point I'm trying to make is that it's there are plenty of really shitty lawyers making a fortune of money, and that's sad, and that's why I say it with arrogance, or I say it in a condescending way. That's sad, but it's true.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question about that. I just want to talk about a topic. You and I could talk for days on end, but it relates to what we were just talking about, intake, right? We could talk about this ad infinitum. I've heard you talk about it. I talk about it. I obsess over intake. What are, I know it's such a big, hairy topic, but what do you see across the country? Like, what are some things that lawyers could do, listen to this call, that could just get them more cases just by virtue of cleaning up their leakage?
Well, first of all, lawyers don't know what's leaking. And if you don't know where the leak in the boat is, or that there is even a leak, then you're not going to fix it. I stumbled into intake and conversion when the industry and the business started to really change. And my clients came to me years ago, 15 years ago, and said, give me more leads, Harlan. And I said, well, what'd you do with the last ones? And they said, well, they weren't any good. Okay, so I started at that point recording telephone calls. I said, they can't all be bad. And I discovered that the way lawyers answer telephone calls and the way they account for their business and the way they manage what's coming at them was not so good. When you got a lot coming at you and things are falling off the plate, you're really only counting what's left on the plate. And I really took a look at intake and conversion, and quite frankly, I took it to preserve my agency. I was protecting me. I did have the philosophy that if I make them more money, they'll spend more money with me. There's no question about that. I'm adamant about that. I was adamant about that. And the truth of it is that there is leakage in every single practice. Do you know a lawyer? I've never met a lawyer that walks into his office, Chris, and said, how many cases didn't we sign today? Every lawyer on the planet, every lawyer that's on this podcast is going to walk in and say, how many cases did we sign today? That's it. So when you take a look at the business aspect of it, you're spending all this money to funnel people to you. And what are you doing with them? And a good operator, a good business will say, I'm going to do something with everyone. Everyone. That's good business. Referral business. I'm going to turn people down in a polite way. I'm going to give them a reason that I can't do business with them. Why? Because the old adage, you put 20 people on the street, one person on the street with bad information, with that was rejected, they're going to tell 20 people. And so it's a cultural conversation on how you want to run your business. How do you want to be perceived? Greedy lawyers, 90% of the lawyers out there are in this for the money. They all say that they're in this, because I want to help people and I want to do this and I want to, give to society, but they're full of shit because their actions don't prove it. I'm really challenging somebody right now. But the truth of the matter is, back to intake and conversion, it is a business. You're spending millions of dollars to make the phone ring. What are you going to do with it? You're going to count what you have, but if you really want to make significant gains, you got to figure out what you're losing because you've already paid for what's falling off your plate. So in essence, if I button up my intake and I figure out what I don't know, what you don't know, you don't know. How profitable is that? I've already paid for the lead. I'm pulling it out of the garbage. It's free at this point, right? Really not, but basically free. And I'm turning it into something. If hypothetically you found one of those a week and you multiplied it by 4, that's 4 cases. Do the math. Now, on a bigger scale, it falls into, different numbers. But just think about that.
That's money math that totally changes a law firm. Any bit, you could be whatever. You could be a barber. People are walking in and you're too busy. They're going to walk out. It's that leakage in the boat. You just totally changed your business model. You don't need to hire as many people. You don't need to do as much marketing, right? Because you just identified leakage. And we did that at my firm.
Well, the one thing that I want people to walk away from, with a couple of things, but I never use intake without the word conversion.
What's your conversion rate you want to see that makes you smile? Like what's success?
The conversion, I have a group of metrics that it's my 6 or 8 pack, and that's what I live by. But at the very top of the list, I want to convert, and you may think this is wrong, but I can assure you, if you call a few of my clients, we're all focused on 92% of wanted leads. And so you have to break down and know what a wanted lead is.
Absolutely. You got to know all the intake data. You got to geek out on this, roll your sleeves up and get to know your numbers, right? A lot of lawyers aren't doing this. A lot of lawyers are, but there's too many that aren't. And they're leaking all these cases. And that's hard to do, but it's not hard to do 92%. If you do a lot of things right. So this wasn't done in one day. This law firm you're talking about, they had to iterate and improve and optimize, but it's a slow burn. Over time, the dial starts to move and that percentage, it increases. But you use the word intentional a lot. I've heard you say that. Like you really have to get into this and be a player.
Well, first of all, Chris, you have to have a scorecard. You can't play a game without a scorecard. I mean, otherwise it's just practice, right? Even in exhibition games, you got a scorecard. And in today's society, there are so many opportunities, whether it's a sales force or a lead docket or, we call them a customer relations management tool, but basically it's a scorecard that allows you to be accountable for everything that you do. And that's how you pick up the game, because unless you know what the game is and know what's going on, then you can't fix it or can't even recognize it. If I can't walk into an office, if you can't, as a lawyer, walk into your office tomorrow morning and say, tell me exactly how many people called, how many cases we didn't sign, how many overall calls we had, how many cases did we sign, and how many cases are you going to chase today, then you're not winning. You're not even coming close to winning the game of building a practice. What you're doing then is you're saying, okay, how many cases did I sign today?
Oh yeah. Again, it's so much different from the late 70s when this didn't exist. I mean, it's almost a crime.
I had a conversation with a lawyer last night. He is a good friend of a really good friend of mine, and he's in He's in Beaufort, South Carolina. He's got I found out he has six lawyers, six or eight lawyers, and 40 people working for himself. He uses a good piece of software. He had Lead Docket. He stopped using it, and he's gone through 3 mastermind groups. That's primarily what happens in a lot of these situations. And he's trying to find a fix for his practice. And after taking a good hard look at what he's doing and the conversation, I said, you've got to get back into your metrics. You abandoned Lead Docket because it wasn't set up properly, and now you have no guideposts. You don't have the metrics. You don't know where you're going. I said, you can go to another group and sit there, and they can teach you culture, and you'll walk away with some fantastic ideas. But that's not going to help you practice unless you understand. You have a navigation guide. You have you know exactly what's going on, and control your intake. And that sounded pretty simple, didn't it? I mean, that was a simple fix, right? I think an idiot could have come up with that, and I'm not that smart. But why aren't people looking at it that way? I mean, you got to look. If you have cancer, what are you going to do? Well, you're going to go cut the cancer out. You're going to go right to the cancer. You want to go right to the problem. And I don't understand why people don't recognize the problem, because they don't want to recognize the problem because they're counting what they're having, not what they're not having.
I agree. And use the word control. And I think intake has to definitely be controlled. It can't be willy-nilly fly at this, just figuring stuff out on the fly. Intake has to be controlled, because you getting the phone to ring does the client no good if they're not capturing all the fish that you're putting on the boat. The boat, if the fish are getting off, then shame on the lawyer.
What are you controlling, and who does it benefit? It benefits the client. When the client calls an organized office, when they call somebody that is buttoned up, when I say buttoned up, they have an intelligent person talking to them about their case in an intelligent way, whether it's an intake specialist or it brings the lawyer in, but they're treated with respect and they are educated at that point to where they are. And I know you want to go for the throat and you want to sign that client up, but unless you're in an organized process, that's not going to happen very well. And so the true benefit is to the client. And if the client is going to benefit, you're going to benefit. Everybody flips the switch and say, it's about me. It's about the lawyer. Well, it's not about the lawyer. It's about the client. So look at the client experience. If the client's experience benefits, if the client benefits from the experience, I should say, right? What's the win here? It's like settling short. 90% of client lawyers sell short. That's what I believe. I've seen it every day. It's rampant. Okay? But who are you screwing? If you want to really be selfish and narcissistic, the lawyer's getting screwed. Well, the client, there's no question, is getting screwed. But the lawyer's getting screwed also because he's cutting his fees. He's not maximizing, his opportunity. Everybody loses.
Because that's when the client journey begins at intake, right? I think about Gary Falkowitz, wrote a great book called Intake. Everyone should read that book. Intake. He talks about a bridge. You're holding their hand and getting them to cross the bridge. But before they cross the bridge, that's when the client experience begins. You and I could talk for days and days about client experience. Like, there's so much to chop up here, right? But the lawyer, the practitioner, needs to get that right, or else they're not going to get any business. And it's a disservice to the client, and it's a disservice to that lawyer not to do it the right way.
Well, let me ask you this. Chris, who do you want to do business with? You got to ask yourself, let's take ourselves out of the client experience. Starts with from the moment of inception of the commercial. It has to do with culture, and that's a whole nother conversation. But who do you want to do business with? I mean, do you want to do business with somebody that's all over the place, or do you want to? I mean, how do you feel when you walk into a store and you're treated special? Not patronized, but look. There's a reason people say that in sales, it's 80% of the people make 20% of the money, and 20% makes 80% of the money. But it's how the client, you want your client to feel. So it's not only in intake, it's in every facet of the practice. It's in every facet of life.
100%. Is it Maya Angelou said, people don't care what you said or did, they care how you made them feel. And this is a feeling business. We talk about storytelling, we talk about human beings, the Bible, but nothing's changed from the beginning of time. We want people who make it, we want to be around people who make us feel good. That's what we recall. That's what matters. When I call your office and you don't, and I can't, I like you because I like you from your commercials. And I'm starting to, feel comfortable. Then I call you and your intake is an abomination. I'm not going to trust you then. You've killed it. I'm going to call the next law firm. So, lawyers on the call, you got to stop the shop. You got to listen to people like Harlan who study this stuff across the country, talk to thousands of lawyers. You got to stop the shop because if you don't nail it.
I think you got to stop. I have never heard that expression, but I like it. But I think you got to sit back and say, how do I want to be treated?
Exactly. From new clients, Harlan, to your team members, your employees, make a Ryan McKean. He was on the podcast a few months ago. He's building a law firm where he'd want to work at, and I presume that he's setting up an intake process for experience that he'd want to experience himself if he called his law firm, right? So it's like, this is not complicated stuff. This is low hanging fruit. The stuff you and I are talking about it doesn't require that. Let me ask you this though. It's common sense, but it's very rare. Let me ask you this. The lawyer, he just got a bar card, he's licensed, he's just getting started. I know that you're a brand guy, and I believe in brand too. I've heard you say brand is what they say about you when you're not in the room. How does a young lawyer, doesn't have any money yet, doesn't have an established name, how do you go about building your brand so that eventually you can get on TV and you can do the billboards or whatever you want to do? How do you build your brand from scratch?
Well, the most important thing in building a brand, and the most important thing for that young lawyer, is for that young lawyer to figure out exactly what path they want to take and who they want to be. And you build your brand around that. You come out of law school and you got a lot of options. Rarely does somebody come right out of law school and hang up a shingle because they don't have experience and and all of that. So it does make sense to find an opportunity. If I was coming out of law school, I'd want to work with the very, very best law firm that I can find, that I can get myself into. And you got to recognize what a good law firm it is, and what a mill is, or I don't want to get into the details of that, but you have that opportunity. If I want to be a great surgeon, or I want to be a doctor, I'll make that analogy. Where do you choose where you want to be your residency? Because basically you're working as with a mentor, and that's really what I see. I know that sounds a little old-fashioned because the whole generation wants to immediately go from law school to the car dealership and buy their high-end vehicle, using that as a description of the thinking. Especially millennials. I want instant success, but you got to pay your dues. You got to learn the business. If you want to be good at something, you have to apprentice. You have to learn the craft. You have to make mistakes. You can make those mistakes on your own, but find a mentor. You have to have a mentor to every great businessman. I don't care who, from a Dale Carnegie to a Harlan Schillinger to Chris Earley. You had a mentor. My father was a great mentor to me. He said to me, nobody gives a shit how much money you have when you die. You're going to be judged by how you treated people. That's falling back to, what your character is. So you got to decide what you want your brand to be. Most people come out and say, I want my brand to be, I want to be the biggest law firm. I want to be bigger than John Morgan. Well, figure out how John Morgan started. I know John from when he began. And he paid his dues. He went through a lot. He didn't, he made more mistakes than you can imagine. It was Morgan, Colling, and Gilbert. That's how the business started. I'm still friends with Ron Gilbert and his old partners. And I talk to John regularly. When I say regularly, a couple of times a month. Usually after he comes off of the mountain in Hawaii, he loves to take his walks. And his favorite person to take a walk is Brian Panish, who's his next door neighbor, for the winter. And he's mentoring from him. But figure out who you want to be. You got to sit back and say, well, I don't know who I want to be. If you don't know who you want to be when you put your pants on, well, you might want to figure it out.
Agreed. I want to be respectful of your time. I want to ask you finally, NTL, super impressed. Miami NTL 3 months ago was amazing. Again, our mutual friend Ken Hardison gave me the stage, and I was talking about from the stage how lawyers can compete with 800-pound gorilla in their market, and I'm just really impressed by NTL. I wasn't able to get to the motorcycle summit because my wife, puts a limit on my travel because I travel a lot. But what's the future of NTL? What are you guys doing? What are you guys cooking up?
Well, it's interesting that you would say that because I'm just working. I had an opportunity to sit down with Michelle Swammer, our director, in Savannah, by the way. It saved me a trip to Dothan. And I really kind of laid out my vision, for next year. I'm called upon, people think I'm smarter than I am. So I'm called upon, to say, okay, well, what do you predict? Which is what you just asked. And quite frankly, the agenda of National Trial Lawyers is to make better lawyers and contribute back to society and contribute back to our profession. That is the overall agenda. We give certainly much more than we take. And we're looking forward to putting on an educational-based arena that makes better lawyers. Quite frankly, that is the agenda. And how you do that is you surround yourselves. If you take a look at the membership and you take a look at the executive council and who really sits and puts these events on, we work very, very hard to bring value to the stage. That is the most important thing. Unselfish value. I was with my dear friend John Romano the other day in Savannah at the motorcycle conference, and he's already thinking, who is the very best person I can put up to talk about this subject? And that's really the essence of National Trial Lawyers, and that's the agenda. I mean, there's certain things that I think that we have to absolutely focus on, as a society. But let's talk about business. Where's the business opportunities? What should you be looking at? On my short list, Hispanic. It's an enormous population, a phenomenal population, and we pander to it. We pander to all categories. Not subcategories. We pander to a lot of things. You got to recognize groups and respect them. And play to them and contribute to them, and respect is really the word that I want to pull together. AI, we're all over the place with AI. Well, it's been around for quite some time, but it's unharnessed. How do you do it? I mean, you look into these chat rooms and people say, well, I'm going to do an AI brief. Okay, are you going to prove it? AI is a dangerous thing. But it's also a very valuable tool as well. One of the greatest things to use AI for in the legal space is research. People think I'm using AI so I can save time and money, in writing something. Well, not necessarily. I don't know if I want somebody writing an AI to write my speech. That's just pulling things from what everybody else said. So, you got to let's really dissect this. So you talk about being an early adopter and understanding what it's about and how do you use it? How do you make it work for you? The most underdeveloped part of a practice, the biggest opportunity is culture. What, I know two people that are teaching culture. I mean, Michael Mogul put his entire life on the line, his business life on the line to teach culture. Spectacular program, but most people don't say they have great culture. I have a friend that has, says he has absolutely great culture, right? And he's gone through 3 or 4 pieces of software. Okay, well, what does that have to do with culture? Well, the inmates are running the asylum. Well, I don't like this and I don't want that. And we're not going to use this. And I mean, that's not culture. That's dysfunction. Culture is a great place to live. Some people, I know law firms that have to turn people away that are applying for jobs because it's a great place to work. And then you have other firms that say, I can't find anybody to work for me. What's the deal? Let's take a good look in the mirror here. Culture is the most important thing that's going to drive. It's your best competitive edge in the business. Now, you have to live culture. It's just like understanding the Hispanic market. You can't buy your way into it. It's like you go down. I was in Indianapolis, and I a couple of months ago, and I'm going on the main highway, and I saw a billboard. They're all trucking billboards. I don't think these lawyers ever tried a trucking case, but they want it. I want the Hispanic population, but you're not working at it to get it. And intake and conversion. I think those are the 4 biggest pillars that you got to focus on in your practice.
And those 4 pillars all have one common thing: hard work. This is hard stuff. It's simple, but it's hard as hell. Again, we say, if you do this stuff every day, you go to conferences and you read books, you talk to smart people like yourself, you're going to be fine. But you got to do this work because this is hard as hell. Right? You talk about John Morgan struggling back in the day. He has struggles today, I'm sure, but he went through it. He got through fear. He was scared shitless. He pushed through. He did the stuff that the average bear won't do, and that's why he is where he is. Right?
Well, isn't that how you win an Olympic medal? Isn't that how you stand out? Isn't that how you you invest? I just wrote the foreword to a dear friend's book. And it's Guy Williams. He is an expert when it comes to community and service and community involvement. And it took me a while to write this, but as soon as I sat down and I understood what I was writing about, the words came very, very easy. And what I said was, what's the most important part of the sentence? Community involvement. Involvement. Writing a check is not really being involved. It's you can give thousands of turkeys away and not be involved. So the whole idea is, how do you get involved? You can raise your kids, right? Never be home for dinner, or you can raise your kids and be involved in their homework. The point I'm trying to make here is that if you don't get your hands involved and you don't recognize it and you don't do something when you walk away from a conference, then you're not involved. You're pandering to yourself.
You got to do the work, man. This is hard work. You have to do the work, and you do the work. And you've seen people, the Morgans, just they do the work, and they get to go to Hawaii and hang out, and lead that kind of life. But they put in their, they put in the dues. They paid the price. The Olympic athlete paid the price, right? And they did it. That's very aspirational. That's inspiring to me, right? Just a little bit each day, and you get there, right?
Well, you have to take responsibility for your actions. You have to take responsibility for what you're trying to accomplish. And most of all, you have to take responsibility for your failures. Your failures are your greatest assets because you learn from your failures.
Oh, I love it. Absolutely. It's so true. And I'm seeing that. I'm failing every day, Harlan. Usually, every day failing, And because that's the way it is. And I'm too dumb to quit, so I just keep going.
Well, I don't think failure is a failure. It's a roadblock. I mean, I don't know anybody that ever got it right on the first, take. Look, we're in a fabulous place in society right now. I mean, we have a lot of challenges. Putting aside, the political climate, putting aside, all of that, we've never been in a situation where we have more options. And you got to work through those options, and you got to find your options that fit you and fit your personality. And that's a tremendous asset. If you're a lone practitioner and you're in court all day and you're spending some money on a business card, or you went to a networking event the night before and somebody calls you, you got to figure out how you're going to get that phone answered. And then you got to say, well, who's answering it, and how are they answering it, and are they answering it because they're representing me? And so, I don't care if you're a single lawyer, a sole practitioner, or you got a major staff. It's a question of taking responsibility. The greatest thing you can do, one of the strongest things I'd like your audience to do, is to listen to their phone calls coming into their office. If you have to walk away from this conversation, Chris, I know you want to add value. Listen to your intake calls. The first thing you're going to say is, I don't have time to do that. Well, that's a whole nother conversation. But listen to your phone conversations, okay? And don't be in denial about it. Listen with somebody else. And then use those calls as a springboard to be better. Because that's where it really begins. I mean, doesn't it?
Right. But that's a process. You don't just do it once, right? That's part of your culture. We listen to the calls because we inspect what we expect. And this is, she's keeping things humming and moving. Because if we have standards, Harlan, we got to enforce the standards. We have to make sure the phone is answered perfectly, because there's no reason why it shouldn't be answered perfectly, right? There's no reason why the intake shouldn't be choreographed the way it's been designed, because we found things that have worked, right? All the lawyers listening, the majority don't listen to the phone calls, and they're going to cringe when they hear that first call, but they got to stick with it, Harlan, right? They got to just keep listening and get through the pain, because the phone calls will get better if they listen to them and take action and do something.
Well, Chris, people don't make change unless they're in pain. They don't make change unless you're in pain. They just don't do it. So you got to figure out where your pain point is. And you got to want to change. But it depends where you want to be in 5 years. Where do I want to be and how am I going to get there?
Well, you're doing something right. I appreciate your time, appreciate your knowledge. You've seen a couple things. You've had a couple rodeos, and this is a really good conversation. I appreciate you getting on the show, sharing your knowledge. A lot of respect for how serious you take this profession, because I do too, and I love it. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it, Harlan.
Absolutely my pleasure. I was looking forward to this, Chris.
Well, you're very kind. Thank you, Harlan. All right, that's it for this episode of The Earley Show. Be sure to check out more episodes of our show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and the Answering Legal YouTube channel.